What's going on, guys? So I just wanted to talk to people about um, fishing reels, specifically um, spinning reels, because in the spinning reel uh, discipline of fishing, there's huge misunderstandings, almost complete lies, that uh, the size of your spinning reel determines whether or not you can cast farther. Okay, and that is a complete lie. That's not accurate. It doesn't make sense for your line to come off more efficiently if you do not have the rod line guide, preferably the first two, but mostly the first one, suitable for a reel that size. There's a reason why they make a lot of 7-foots in all different power ranges. And if you go all the way up to like 7.2, okay? In some cases 7.4. They really don't change much, those first eye guides, until you start getting to like 9-foot, right? There's a reason for that, because length, the distance you cast is not determined by the size of your reel. It's determined by the length of your rod, okay? And not by the power of your rod, the length of your rod, okay? An ultralight 7-foot rod can cast just as far as a medium light 7-foot rod, okay? And they use totally different weights, and they basically equal out when they're throwing what they're supposed to be throwing. And there's a reason why, if you go look at your ultralights, your lights, your mediums, your medium lights, okay, all at 7 foot and under, they're basically all going to have the same size guide. And that is because you are supposed to be downsizing your reels. You know what rod you're dealing with and what kind of application, what kind of setup you're supposed to be running based off of what that first guide looks like. I know what style of fishing, okay, that rod is built for based off of that guide. I don't care if it's a medium light. If it only has 1.25 inches diameter, I'm not using anything bigger than a 1,000 size spool, because you don't need any more capacity greater than that, right? At 4-pound test or 2-pound test on a 1,000 size spool, you can fit over 300 yards on there, okay? People just have a bad habit of fishing oversize, over excess, go big or go home, and using stuff to fish for species of fish you don't even need to be using, you shouldn't be using, right? Talking like people know what they're talking about, right? All these pro YouTube, pro fishermen, right? And when it comes to rods, it's not about length, it's about application. And mostly spinning rods, because bait casters, that's simple. That's straightforward. You slap a bait caster on there, and they're all going to have micro guides. It's totally different, okay? If you just want to set it and forget it, something that even a kid can do, no offense, but I mean, I'm just saying that would be it, right? Because you learn how to cast it, and that's basically it, you know? Deal with a backlash or two, so what? Kids deal with backlashes on spinning reels too. I digress, but you know, it's not that complicated of a system. Let's just be real. And so there is a reason why we have bigger rod guides overall, down the whole blank, bigger rod guides, okay? And that is because the format in which our line comes off of that spool is different than the way it comes off a baitcaster. Okay, baitcaster comes back and forth, straight out, and ours comes off. Okay, and it comes off free spooling. Okay, free weight, dead spool, dead weight. Right, because we flip the bail, and at that point, there's nothing holding that bait back. There's no inertia that needs to start up. Right, what determines on how far that bait's going to get put out there is the length of the rod. At that point, the spine of the rod is what is going to determine the propelling motion of your lure, right? It doesn't rely on its own spool to do that. And that's where I come in second with saying that it doesn't make any sense that it matters how big your spool is, just because of that, right? That only reaffirms that it does not matter. Okay, if you want a rod that's designed for a 2000 or a 2500 style spool, okay, then you need to make sure that you are getting, and I don't care what power class it's in, you need to make sure that you're getting a rod that is suited for bigger reels. Okay, that eye guide needs to be bigger. It needs to be 2 inches, 1 3/4 inches. It needs to be a much bigger first eye guide. Okay, and that's because what determines whether you can cast far or not, or at least I'll say determines whether you are going to achieve max casting ability, is going to be friction. Okay, friction is everything. You're not helping yourself if you say, well, yeah, line comes off a 2000 spool faster than a 1000 or a 750, right? That may be true, but that's broken logic. That's dead logic. That's like no better than waking up dead, in my opinion. Okay, because what does it matter if it comes off slightly more efficient? More line is coming off at once, right? More inch per length is coming off, right? Better. What does it matter? It doesn't. It doesn't matter. Wanna know why it doesn't matter? Because your rod guide is only about 1 inch, right? At 7 foot, it's still only 1 inch, and you're choking that rod guide up with line having to come off like this, okay, and then go through your first rod guide, and it just bottlenecks up, hairs up, everything, puts all the friction right on that eye guide in order to come out. Okay, what you're doing is totally screwing up your cast, your casting distance. You think you're getting max cast because somebody told you put a 2500 on a 7 foot rod, right? And you're not getting max capabilities. Okay, somebody taught you that more line comes off. What does it matter if it comes off like that, if it's getting choked up and bird nesting and backlashing? It doesn't matter. You're taking in one hand, you're taking the pressure off of your reel and you're putting it all on your rod guide, right? What determines faster, more efficient casting is less friction, less impedance on your line and on your rod guides. Okay, the less impedance it's going to have, the further you're going to cast, the softer your cast is going to be. The straighter you can get line to come off straight out of your rod like that, the better you are. And how do you achieve that? You achieve that with a smaller reel. Downsize your reels. You should not have a 2500 or a 3000 or a 2000 on a rod with an eye guide that is like 1 1/8 inch in 3/8. Okay, you should not be having that. Okay, manufacturers will even tell you, when considering a rod to reel size, consider your rod guide, your first guide, preferably the first 2, but right, you'll know what that rod is suited for, what it's best suited for, or what its range is best at dealing with, right? when you're talking about how big that guide is. Um, because choking up your rod guide is not a way to cast farther. Okay? There's a reason why it's 7 foot. Doesn't matter what power they are. If you go check all your rods right now, most of them I can guarantee are going to have nothing greater than an inch for a first rod guide. Okay? Inch and a half maybe. Somewhere around that range. They're all going to be, no matter if it's ultralight or a heavy rod. Right? And that's because distance is affected by length of your rod, not diameter of your reel. Right? The diameter of your reel only helps you if it's paired with your rod guide. Okay? You're going to have better help from a 1000 or a 1500 on a rod guide that is no greater than an inch and a quarter than if you slapped a 2500 on there. I can promise you that. Okay? You will cast further and ensure that you're getting your max cast capability every time, right? Because you're not putting friction on your rod guides. And I've seen it a million times. They come off and they whirl up and it's spinning like a cyclone, right? And it balls right up at the top until it can squeeze through and get through the odd. I've seen it a million times. And then when they reel it back in, you know, then they have backlash, right? And line twist, major line twist, and all kinds of stuff. You know, there's a reason why they make those rod guides that way, and it's because a lot of people overfish with stuff they don't need to fish with, that they shouldn't be fishing with, right? Fish with line diameters and capacities of line that you're not supposed to be fishing with a 7 foot rod. Okay, it's application. And at that point, if your 7 foot bass rod only has no greater than an inch rod guide, and you need the capacity to be running 10, 12 pound test, you're actually not going with a smart rod making choice. Okay, you're not going, the rod makers are not, they don't really know what they're doing. Or they're telling you that it's not designed for a 3000 size spool. Okay, it's designed for a 1500. Okay. If you need the capacity, you need to go with a rod that takes that into consideration. Okay, this is for fishing upwards to 10, 12 pound test, right? Or anything similar in that diameter test range, right? So we need to put a 2-inch rod guide on this rod, right? So that they can use a 3000 and have the line capacity, right, for the application that they're choosing to fish with, right? Like, you know, and this is the problem, is people really don't know how to pick out rods either, you know. And it's just because there's a massive trickling down, upside down pyramid of false information, misinformation, disinformation, you know, misconceptions, right? And honestly, even just bull-faced lies, really. Bad culture. American fishing has bad culture. Okay. And you will always, you know, you will always have line come off faster if it's paired with your rod guide, like I said before. Okay, it's not about what size it is, it's about whether it's paired right with your rod. Okay, you know, you don't need to be fishing, well, if I don't have a medium rod, then I can't I can't use 20 pound test. Well, maybe you shouldn't be fishing with a medium sized rod, right, to get 1 to 2 pound bass, right? 5 on a good month. All right, maybe you should be knowing better than that, and knowing that you should probably be using a medium light or a light rod and downsizing a 4 to 6 pound test, right? At the max 8, right? For that type of fishing, to be honest with you. right? Unless you're in super mucky crap. But I mean, honestly, this is the problem, is people keep linking it to something else that they don't need because they don't know that they shouldn't be fishing with anything that they're fishing with. So it's a bad trickle down of just a bunch of materials that they're using they shouldn't be using. I can't set the hook with that diameter line. Well, that's because you shouldn't be using that line. Or, I can't use that line if I don't have this rod. Well, you shouldn't be using that rod. You know, I mean, this is the problem. And, you know, people don't realize that you have more than enough capacity of line if you are packing it correctly. Number one, pack that to the brim and learn how to cast. Okay, I pack my stuff to the brim and I don't get backlash. Okay, because I know how to cast. Right, I reduce as much friction as possible. Right, and these are things you just learn through fishing, and I've been fishing long enough to know that you know, a lot of these things are just nonsense that are taught, especially in the land of YouTube. And honestly, line will always, they teach you that line comes off slower because it's a thinner diameter spool, and it gets extra backlash and line twist, and it holds extra memory because it comes off a bigger spool and goes onto a smaller one, and blah blah blah. And it's like, says who told you that? What science proves that? Line is going to come off at a thinner diameter, right? At faster than a thicker one. Okay, it may retrieve to you faster because it's picking up more line, but that's on the retrieval. That's not on the exit. Okay, and to be honest with you, no, you know, it's going to come off much faster on a thinner diameter spool, smaller diameter spool. Okay, and it's going to be much more efficient. Okay, and you are going to see that you will cast farther because there's no impedance there's no pressure you're putting or friction on your line or your rod guides. And nothing's getting knotted up on the way out or bunched up or haired up, nothing. Because it's coming straight out, as close as you can get to a bait caster. Okay, that's what's going on with that. And you will realize that if you're using line you should be using, pound test, your diameter line you should be using, you having a deceiving amount of line on that spool despite how small it is. Okay, at a 1000 I can still have 300 yards of line on there with 4-pound test, right? With an ultralight rod, which is like basically you shouldn't even be going greater than that in my opinion, right? So these are the things that people should be considering. You know, using appropriate stuff to fish, and people are not. And that's why they have the problems, and they have to band-aid solutions that are not even broken, right? To begin with. You're band-aiding things that are not broken to begin with. That's called intellect versus intelligence, okay? And they are not the same, okay? One is software and one is hardware, right? So I just want to say that people, there's a lot of stuff in American fishing culture that is just wrong. Everything is wrong, you know, and there's no standards in our market. You know, and you kind of, with fishing, it's like you find this stuff out the longer you fish with experience. You come to realize these things, especially if you're a spinning fisherman, because that is a lot more deep than bait casting. That is a very different craft to hone, considering synergistic relationships, harmonious relationships and stuff between the materials, the equipment that you're using, okay? The art of spinning fishing is far deeper and far greater than bait casting, right? And I think a lot of people learn very toxic, destructive habits from learning how to bait cast first. Bait casting, in my opinion, teaches everybody everything wrong about fishing, right? And a lot of people who come from bait casting don't realize that everything is oversized, everything is just overkill, right? And they don't even realize that they're not fishing with rods. They like, you know, somebody who comes from a bait caster or whatever will tell you like, oh yeah, you're fishing for bass, get a medium rod. Why the hell do I need a medium rod to catch bass, right? I don't, not even close. I can catch up to a 60-pound fish with a medium light rod. I don't need a medium rod for that. That is absolutely overkill, right? You're destroying fish, right? It's overkill. You're not even, you know, they think that the power of your rod has to do with, people kill themselves with their own logic, man. Dead logic. Because it's like, you know, they think because of the power of the rod is what you should be fishing for. And if they actually knew that, then they wouldn't be using a medium rod. Because by that logic, medium rods are not even for bass, right? Power of your rod should be for application, not for the size of fish you're catching. So, yeah. People fall on at the bottom of the ocean with that logic, that broken ass logic, right? I hardly ever need to use a medium rod. Hardly ever, right? So, you know, these are the things that people should be considering. Because I can take one look at somebody's rod and know if they know what they're doing. I can tell you if they know how to cast. I can tell you if I can take one glance. One glance, man. So that's what I want people to consider, man. Because people really are not, you know, I mean, we rely on the last 10% of our line for casting performance. And, you know, even with a 1,000, if you have 300 yards on there packed to the brim, right? And you've taken, I mean, you could lose so much line at that diameter, 4-pound diameter, before it even plateaus or dips in performance that you would even notice when you cast, because the line is so thin, right? And you have such a deceiving amount of line on that small reel. People don't realize, right? People fish like they're applying methodology to like using like 12-pound test. And it's because you're fishing with everything you don't need. You don't know as much. I could tell you, you don't know as much as you claim to know. And it baffles me how some of these people have professional fishing channels, okay, teaching this stuff. And they have sponsorships and everything. They do rod reviews and everything. They fish for a living, for money. And it baffles me, because we got real anglers out here who've never even fished a tournament. Okay, that could tell you what I just told you, and I could promise you it would make people's ears fall off just listening to me talk about this, right? Yeah, there's very few like very, very good anglers out there that they know what they're talking about. They know what they're doing out there on the water, right? And so this is what I would like people to know, you know, because if you've taken friction off your rod by packing it right, you will cast farther. It's about how you pack your reel. Pack the line on your reel. It's about sizing that to your first rod guide, right? That's what's going to get you casting performance. That's what's going to help your 7-foot rod achieve the distance it's supposed to cast, right? With any given weight or line that you're going to put on that rod. Okay. And that's what people need to understand, right? When you've effectively taken the impedance off of your reel by packing it correctly, sizing it correctly to the rod guide, given the length of the rod, so that there is no friction coming off of that reel or going out of that rod guide, right? That's when you've done it right. So, have a nice day.